The purpose of Wealth Talk is to educate, inform, and hopefully entertain you on the subject of building your wealth. WealthBuilders recommends you should always take independent financial, tax, or legal advice before making any decisions around your finances.
Welcome to episode 190 of Wealth Talk. My name's Christian Rodwell, the Membership Director for WealthBuilders, and this week we are taking a look back of some of our favourite episodes, focusing on the property portfolio pillar number 4 of our 7 pillars of wealth. And it's been such a tough choice going back through and pulling out some of the best featured guests over the last 4 years, but we've done our best for you today. And we kick off with episode 26, Kevin and myself talking about property.
And, we're always going to be, I suppose, reminding people of some of the things they've heard before for a number of reasons. All of this does join up. And of course, it's nice to be reminded if some while ago, you listened to something, you understood it, but you didn't necessarily put it into action. But you definitely need to think very carefully about property, because if you're thinking about it, obviously property is such a fascinating asset, isn't it? It's tangible. You can feel it. You can experience it. You can touch it in so many different ways that you can't do with the other big pillar, which is investments. And it's, but of course there's so much more involved in that. And if you talk about, we could reel strategies off our tongue, Chris, couldn't we? We could go rent-to-rent, sourcing, buy-to-let, HMO with all the multitude of types of HMO, student service, special needs, LHA, service accommodation, lease options, commercial to residential, develop. Ooh.
There's a number.
Keep going, right? I don't know how many that was, and that was just so just straight off. And there's probably well over a dozen real property strategies. And what we don't want to do is, in this episode, Chris, is we're not going to dive deep into these. There's no point in doing that. We've got so many trusted partners who are experts in fields, but we know enough at WealthBuilders to know how each of the strategies work, which is critical, because the starting point for all forms of wealth, Chris, going back to the Wheel of Wealth, is
Education.
So there's so many different sources of education. So, I don't want this episode to be just a repeat of other people's education, but it might be useful for new members just to almost be reminded of some of the principal ones, some of the pros, some of the cons, some of the things they should be thinking about in using their sources of leverage, some of the dangers that you always have to keep in mind when you're looking at property. But, the big advantage of property when it comes to, which is why I think starting with leverage, Chris, is a good one, is the fact that property uniquely is probably within all different economies, UK, US, and so on, you can just get leverage.
In episode 164, we invited Simon Zutshi, the founder of the Property Investors Network, to share some of his thoughts on the best strategies for property investing in the current UK market.
I think that because of the changing legislation, so for example, we have the fact that if you have a rental property by 2025, really it needs to have an EPC rating of C, so energy performance certificate of C, to be able to rent it out. Now, if it's currently rented, tenants in there, you've got till 2028 to do that. But some properties, it's very difficult to upgrade them. Some you can just spend money and it'll be fine. But that, with the fact that the government's got rid of or getting rid of Section 21, and also there's the effect of Section 24, which is where they changed the tax rates that we as property investors pay. There are more and more reasons why many landlords are thinking about, maybe I should retire. Maybe I should sell up the portfolio. There's been massive growth over the last 10, 12 years. Values have gone up. Maybe I could cash out now and just sit on the money and go and do something else. Now, that I think is an underlying thought in many investors' minds who have been doing it a long time. But then with the very recent changes this year and in the last couple of months of the Bank of England base rate going up, there are many investors who've had buy-to-let properties for the last 10 years that have been making good money for them, but only making good money, Christian, because the interest rates were really low. And with interest rates going up, those profits are being squeezed. And that's just another reason for more and more landlords thinking about selling up. Now, here's the question. I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? And all the experts I'm speaking to, we're all seeing the same thing, that more and more landlords are looking to retire. And if you think about it, in any market, you always have some people coming in who are new, who are starting, and some people are exiting and retiring. So that always happens, but we're just seeing more and more looking to retire. So the question is, if all of this extra landlord stock comes onto the market, will the underlying demand be enough to soak it up and prices continue? Or will there be an oversupply, which means that maybe prices start to correct? Now, I don't know, but if I had to put money on it, I think they're going to generally slow and start to correct. Okay, I don't think we're going to have a big crash, but hey, I just don't know. Okay, but here's the really important thing for me, Chris. And again, if you follow this logic, I think there'll be landlords who are thinking about selling up, who remember the crash in 2008, 2009, and who remember property prices, because the global financial crisis came down 20, sometimes even 30%, who might be thinking, well, actually, I'm thinking about retiring. Prices are starting to dip. Maybe I should sell now, even at a slight discount, because if I take 10% off now, it's better than having to sell at 20 or 30% in a few years' time. So I think for that reason, we will see more and more landlords looking to sell, which means actually, if you're looking to get into the game and start or get more property, as long as you know what you're doing, now is always a good time.
Yeah. And I know one of your golden rules, Simon, is always buying at discount. That's where you make your money.
Absolutely. If we can buy at a bit of a discount, it means we've got some equity trapped in the property day one. It gives us a bit of a safety buffer. And if we want to refinance to get our money out, it's easier to do that quicker. Having said that, Chris, I will sometimes buy things at the full listed price, because sometimes the listed price has already been discounted. And a slight distinction I'd like to give you and all the listeners is that sometimes people think it's advertised for 250. I've got to pay less than I've got to buy the discount, not recognizing that 250 might already be a good price, because it might be worth 270, 280. If you imagine someone who's got they built property portfolio over a number of years, if they sold all of those in one go, they would have a lot of capital gains tax to pay. So capital gains tax, just for anyone who doesn't know, is the tax you pay when you sell an asset that's gone up in value. Could be stocks, could be property. And it's the difference between what you bought it for and what you sell it for, less any buying or selling costs or capital improvements. So most of the landlords who are selling property are going to have some capital gains tax to pay. Now, we all get a capital gains tax personal allowance each year. I think it's at time of recording, so I think it's £12,300. If you own a property in joint names with a partner, it's almost £25,000. So in other words, you could sell some assets in the first almost 25K if you own it in a partnership or with a relationship partner. It's tax-free, but you only get the allowance once each year. So in an ideal world, a landlord should phase the sales of their portfolio over a number of different years, utilizing that maximum allowance each year, thus reducing the amount of tax they pay. So in theory, that makes a lot of sense, right, Christian?
Yeah, absolutely.
The problem with that is if someone says, well, I want to retire, I don't want to be holding on to my last property for another 5-7 years, whatever. I want to kind of get rid of them now. There's an amazing strategy that we can use called a purchase lease option.
In episode 176 of Wealth Talk, we invited Lisa Brown to share how you can get started in developing supported living properties. What is supported living? What do we mean by that term?
So it's a living arrangement for a tenant with support needs. So as a property investor, you let your property to an organisation who lease your property from you for a period of time. It might be a few years, sort of typically anything between 2 to 7 years, sometimes up to 10 years. And they take over the management of your property, and then they bring in tenants who have support needs. So they can be people for a range of support needs, people with learning disabilities, people who've been homeless, people who are fleeing domestic abuse, children in care, or teenagers leaving the care system. There's a range of people with support needs. And all of these organisations are looking for properties to lease. All of these support organisations and charities, as part of the package that they deliver to support people, they also need a home for people to be in. So as a property investor, it's a great opportunity to let your property to an organisation and create homes for people who really need them.
Why should someone listening now perhaps consider this over other strategies that are more well known?
Well, I think if you've been a landlord for any length of time, if you've been a property investor, you know quite quickly how voids can eat into your profits. So on a standard buy-to-let or an HMO, even if you, at the moment, while the property market's really hot, you'll still have a few weeks in between tenants if someone gives notice. So in that time, you're still covering the mortgage costs, you're covering probably the council tax, any other utility liabilities you have within that time that there's that void. And then you also have that kind of wear and tear, those little bits and pieces that need to be done, every day, those little kind of, we just need to repaint the hall or replace that bit of carpet here, or all of those things are taken away from you when you let a property to a supported living provider. They will lease your property. They will pay you money every single month for the length of that lease. So whether that's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, however long the lease is, you're getting that money in every month. So you find out quite quickly you're net better off because you're not covering those voids. You've then also got the wear and tear that you're not covering. It depends on the lease. Each lease is slightly different and each provider will cover different things. But quite often they'll cover wear and tear damages. They'll cover things like the gas boiler servicing, bits and pieces like that. So they take away the cost of those things, but also the time hassle. And I think even if your property is managed by a letting agent, there's still quite a lot of administration you have to do. You still have to authorize that repair or look at those quotes and decide which one you want to go with. There's quite a lot of bits and pieces to do. And if you self-manage, then obviously there's more. So it's about financially, you're better off quite often letting to a provider. You're also time better off. You're not managing all of those bits and pieces. And you're also creating homes for people with support needs. The organisations I speak to all the time struggle to find landlords who will work with them, which means, there's as a homeless organisation that I know well, and they currently have a massive waiting list for people that, who are desperate to move into their properties. They don't have enough properties. People are sleeping on the street on their waiting list at the moment. And it's like, actually, we need to get more properties to get these people off the streets or to get people safely housed. So it's like the property investors property speak and think in that way, and the providers speak in a different way. And I felt like actually what we needed to do was try bringing people together and bring people into the same space to build relationships and try and understand each other. So the vision with the network is that actually people connect and collaborate and learn to understand each other and understand each other's issues. And then through that, we've got a whole load of shared training as well. So to share good practice and help people to understand how they can work with each other. So we're kind of overcoming that those two sort of siloed groups, if you like, because I saw lots of sort of deals falling over where people weren't understanding each other. So bringing people together to build those relationships and make it easier to find each other. Because I speak to the providers who are saying, I can't find any property investors. I'm desperate for this property. And I speak to the property investors who are going, I can't find any providers anywhere. And I'm like, well, we need to bring everyone into one space and try and build those relationships so people can do this.
In episode 93 of Wealth Talk, Jerry Alexander showed us how commercial property investment can work for those of us who are not from a commercial or professional property background.
So you talked about that kind of light bulb moment. You realised commercial, there was something going on here that excited you. You could see some potential. So how did that develop, and what's the main strategy that led to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So none of this has really been fully by design, right? So let's just get that out there. I'm not some genius, but what happened was I bought that commercial property without knowing how much influence rental has on the value of property. So over the years, my primary objective was to increase the cash flow. And I then spotted another building about 4 or 5 years later, a commercial one. It was half vacant. And I had to go to the bank and say, right, can we, let's talk about raising some funds for this. And of course, they wanted a revaluation on the property that we'd done originally. That's when the light bulb moment came, because we got a valuer in and the value tripled. And the reason the value tripled was because we'd taken the income from relatively modest level up to 3 times the amount. That's the net income. So the building hadn't changed. Yeah, we'd have made improvements. The customers, some of them had changed for sure. But what had changed dramatically was the income, and that totally affected the value of the property. So that was the light bulb moment for me. It was like, oh, so this isn't just a passive activity. You can actually be quite active in commercial and add value. Whereas residential, you can add value to an extent. You add an extension or other parts or gold plate everything, but ultimately your value is pegged back by the properties around that location. Whereas with commercial, there's so much more influence on value based on the cash flow and the net income. You could choose to do the property side. So we've got a propco and an opco, one being a property company, the other being an operations company. You could buy a building, do all the refurbishment and whatever needs to be done, effectively the redevelopment, and that would be held within a property company. Then the operating, which there is more on our niche, there is more operating on a day-to-day, and we have an operating company that sits there effectively as the tenant. And we have our staff in there, our customer contracts, our supplier contracts, so everything's ring-fenced in a separate entity. And that entity then pays, well, actually, effectively, it's a management fee up to our property company. So the two of them can sit quite separate. So you could do both, which is what we do, or you could just do the operating company, or you could just do the property company. Obviously, the property side is really where you're going to build your wealth through increasing the value of the property. But the operating business that we have has a few employees, 200 odd customers, and there's day-to-day operations. But we've built up a team in there that now run that. But if you were doing HMO or serviced accommodation or all the other residential strategies, it's the same thing. You can either do it yourself or you get somebody else to do it for you.
What would you suggest is a good way for someone who perhaps is in residential at the moment and they're looking to get started in commercial?
Okay. So the first thing is get in the swim, find out what's going on, speak to people. Maybe agents is a good place to start, of course, but find other people that are operating in commercial property. I mean, it can be quite opaque, this industry. And when you're standing on the outside looking in, it looks like the curtains are always shut. You phone up an agent, they don't return your call. You drive past the building, it's got a for sale sign, you phone them up. Apparently it was sold 2 years ago. It's quite challenging sometimes. But I think that's the best opportunity about this market, because it is a bit more difficult to penetrate. But I don't think you have to jump in with all, both feet. You can start small. That would be my main suggestion. Start small, buy something that has got less risk. Okay, there'll be less upside, but it gets you in the swim, teaches you how to find property, how to finance it, how to get tenants in, how the leases work, all that stuff. So you can build up your confidence and your knowledge. But if you have your own business, that can often be the first natural way into this, is you use your business as the tenant. And it might be that if you have, for instance, a pension where you can buy commercial property, you would effectively, your day-to-day trading business would be the tenant, and your SSAS or whatever would buy the property and move your own business into it so that you're able to collect that rent rather than paying it to someone else. And interestingly, if you're wanting to actually look at developing commercial as a strategy for building wealth, then just buy something that's a bit oversized, and then you would be able to potentially get another tenant in to a section of the building that you're not occupying to generate more income. And that's often the way we teach people to get started. It's just, if you've got your own business, use that as the main vehicle to get in as a tenant, but oversize the property so you can start letting out, subletting effectively.
Ryan Luke was our guest in episode 90 of Wealth Talk, and he talked to us about the 1,000 property mindset and the importance of knowing your numbers. What was the catalyst for you, Ryan? Because we talk about the beginning of anyone's wealth building journey is to get really clear on the reason why. And I know that there was certainly a kind of turning point for you a few years back. Would you mind just sharing that?
Yeah, sure. So I've always worked hard, and I've always loved money. I'll be honest. A lot of it is about the money, and especially at the beginning. But I was sat on my couch and I couldn't be bothered to take my 2-year-old son, he would have been then, to a birthday party. I just couldn't be bothered, and I wasn't really engaging too well at home, and it wasn't great, to put it that way. And then as you do, sat on the couch, feeling sorry for yourself, scrolling through Facebook, and a sponsored ad pops up about, you can build a great business, but be careful you don't burn your ship whilst you're doing it. And it just like really resonated with me that, I'm putting so much time and effort into building the business up, but what's the point if you've got no family and you don't spend time with your kids and your wife hates you? And, so it really hit home, and I delved into it a bit more. I paid, I don't know, there and then $300 or whatever it was to get all the videos and watch more. And I consumed all that day before they even came back from the party. And then I bought into they had a mentorship program. And that was all about kind of your 4 pillars, which was, if I remember them now, your business, your health, your faith, which isn't really my thing, but I kind of went with it. Business, health, faith, and your wife, your family. So, and it's kind of like having all 4 of them intact to be able to thrive and be the best business person you can. Because we see it so many times where you've got the most successful CEOs, but they're like 25 stone, and they're like, they just haven't taken care of the health at all. Whereas like your body is your biggest asset you're ever going to own. Without your body, you can do nothing. You can't build a business if you've got no health, or you're not a long term anyway. And then obviously it was about, you can have all the money in the world, but if you've got no family, you've got no happiness. And, if you've got no kids, you've got no relationships. And so it was, I could quite quickly see that my balance was totally off. So that's why I engaged with them and really started to balance everything out. And from that, naturally, everything then becomes so much better, including the business. I just think numbers can tell you anything about your business health. So I have numbers drilled down to, and people laugh when I say this, but I know how much drive time my deal sources have to spend per week to be able to acquire the number of deals that we need per week. Because I like nail it all the way down from, number of viewings we need to go on, number of offers we need to make, number of hours spent on the viewings, number of hours spent driving around the viewings. And I've got numbers for like every single department. So, how many hours we need to spend van stalking to get so many direct bookings, et cetera, et cetera. So I just think with your numbers, you can, what can be measured can be altered, right? So if you're measuring something and it's not going well, you can alter it. If you just fly blind, which so many people do, I get so many people, clients come aboard and I'll be like, what's your monthly net profit? And they're like, oh, I don't know, but I know my bank balance is doing X, Y, or Z. It's like, you can't gauge off your bank balance, especially as you grow. There's so many different departments, and quite often, people will have maybe 5 or 10 properties, but they don't know individually how each one's performing. They just know as a whole what the performance is. Well, that's all well and good, but what if 2 of them are absolutely soaking your profit up? And if by just getting rid of them, you could be so much more profitable. What I realized at that point was I acquired loads so quickly, but then I had a real dry spell where I didn't acquire anything for about 3 months. And I was like, well, that's because I'm doing all the operations. So I haven't got time to do all the viewings. So that made me think, okay, well, if we are going to get to 1,000 properties, from day one, I need to build with that 1,000 property mindset. So if I had 1,000 properties today, so say, for example, if someone rang me today and said, could you by any chance go and do a tenant viewing for one of the HMOs? My answer is just a flat out no. I know that it might generate me some revenue. Like, obviously, I might get a tenant on and I should really go and do it and this, that, and the other. But my mindset is the 1,000 property mindset. So if I had 1,000 properties right now, could I go and do a tenant viewing? No, it would be impossible because I'd have so many other things to do, or I would be asked to do probably 15 viewings a day or whatever it might be. So everyone in my team now, we have this 1,000 property mindset where it's like, could you do that task if we had 1,000 properties right now? And if the answer is no, then we need to then solve the problem and make sure we've got the right person in place, the right system in place, the right software, whatever it might be. I believe that by doing that now, that will help me get to 1,000 properties. And when I get to 1,000 properties, I won't then have the operational issues. And I think it's kind of it's a kind of chicken and egg scenario that if I didn't do it now, I would never get to 1,000 because I would always just be running around these operational issues and solving them rather than actually moving the business forward every week.
In episode 136, we invited Luke Spikes, the founder of Higgy House, to talk about how he built his brand and how he was able to see the property market from a different perspective.
Higgy House is one of those brands, because we put a lot of effort into building a brand and creating awareness in and around what we were doing. A lot of people assume we've been around forever. Well, actually, we haven't. What we've accomplished has been accomplished in a relatively short order. I found myself in the world of property by accident because I had a property that I didn't know what to do with. Like a lot of folk, kids, older children, grown up, left home, bigger house than you need. Question mark, what do we do with this? And I had just sold my business. I was now working for my last business. I was working for a large corporation now. I collected some cash. So I was sort of sitting there. And on the one hand, I had this asset, this property that's the family home that we'd owned for quite some while that was too big for our needs. On the other hand, I had some capital, some cash, thinking, well, what do I do next once I have done my earn out with this large corporation? Speaking to my wife, she didn't want me to do anything at all because she was fed up with the whole world of startups and all the pain that brings with it, not just for you, but for everyone else in and around. And I said, I know what I'll do. I'll just buy some books. In other words, my natural instinct is to intellectually curious, get to know something about property. So I bought some books, and one of those was Simon Zutshi's book, Property Magic. Picked it up, didn't put it down. I thought, wow, there's some really interesting ideas in there that have started my brain sparking on what I might do. And in parallel with that, I had conversations with my children about how difficult it was for them as young adults, young professionals, young adults, making their way in the world to find good quality accommodation that met their needs as they perceive their needs to be today. And classic entrepreneur going, hang on a minute. There's loads of properties. I hear this all the time. There's loads of properties. There's loads of landlords. How come you can't find what you say you want and need? What is it you want and need? So I spent time then listening to them about what they felt they needed. And, a bit of scratching around. It's clear that there was a gap in the market, let's call it that. And so Higgy House was effectively born out of that. And it started out with a brief for our thinking that said New York loft meets Danish with a dash of Tokyo for installation and application of small space living. So that's what we started with. And we said, well, what does that look like? And after a degree of iteration between myself, my sister, a couple of creatives, and one or two other members of the team, we ended up defining the look that has become the Higgy House look, which I would describe as sort of industrial, upcycled, quirky, colourful, because there's a little bit of colourful, but actually designed around the target market we were seeking to serve general interest. Something instantly Instagrammable, for example, right? So very cool, deemed stylish by the audience we were seeking to. So that was the original aesthetic. What we then proceeded to do was to define that as systematically as we could in terms of what does that mean in terms of the furniture we put into place, the flooring, all the finishes. Went and executed that. And then each time we've executed it subsequently, we've stuck to the core principles, but improved or innovated slightly each time. How it looks is important. How it feels is important. And how it feels is not just about the space, but it's also about what you do to foster and create community. So how you gather, who you have in the house will make a difference. So how you go through the process of recruiting your housemate. We don't call them tenants, by the way, because I think that's abusive, right? It's tenant landlord somehow sets the wrong tone. It's their housemates, they're our customers. They're giving us money each month for a service. We have to deliver that service at a level that meets or exceeds their expectations. Very different way of thinking about it. But the community is about who is in the house, but it's also what you do when they're in the house. And that's partly design as well. So it's not just how it looks, it's also how you organize the space makes a big difference. The opportunity to gather, to bump into one another as a group of strangers, ostensibly, when they arrive, and they do end up emerging friends. There's no question about it. So there's a layer of service that often gets missed by most investors, which is a little bit of investment of time and effort, but it produces extraordinary returns in terms of the rates people are prepared to pay, how quickly you can let the units, rooms, how long people stay, whether you have voids or not, your operating costs are lower. There's a whole bunch of real sensible reasons as to why investing a little bit of time and effort into the, let's call it the service layer that sits on top of the asset, is an important and sensible thing to do. I do get a lot of folk who come to me and say, do I really need to spend that much money and that much effort and that much time? The answer is, well, no. But if on the other hand, you want to produce record rents that are 50% higher than market average, you want voids of 0%, you want to sell every room without a viewing, and you want 100% conversion, which is what we effectively got in the last property. If you would like all of those things, yes, do what I'm doing. If you don't want that, then don't do that.
In episode 171 of Wealth Talk, we invited former member turned wealth coach Toby Spanier to share creative ways about financing your property deals.
Because I was doing a strategy of buying derelict properties, they were derelict. And if they're derelict, then, well, you can't live in them. And if you can't live in them, they're not residential. If they're not residential, the residential stamp duty rate doesn't apply. So there's a 3% surcharge for property investors buying residential property, but it doesn't apply if the building is completely uninhabitable. So already I just found that there was another advantage to buying in cash and buying stuff that wasn't mortgageable. And that's another way of saving some money. So tax mitigation is just a creative finance strategy that is open to everybody. And all you need to do is understand the rules and then just follow the rules. So that was really helpful. And then brings on to the third creative thing that I did. And again, all these things, I didn't set out with a really clever strategy. I just found them just by turning the wheel. But the third one was using the council to help fund my deals. It sounds a bit amazing, but it happens. And I operate in Kent, but there are councils elsewhere who have similar schemes. But one of the schemes in Kent is if you purchase buildings which are uninhabitable and you bring them back into use, then the council will give you an interest-free loan for 3 years to do the works. So it's like having another bank, but this is a bank that doesn't really care about your loan to value, whether you're 75 or 85%. They need some kind of security to give you a loan, like any organisation. But I actually found it's incredibly flexible, and I fell into it because the first property I bought in my second portfolio near to me, I completed on the day that lockdown was announced. And I thought, wow, I might not be able to finish this deal. I was going to turn it into an HMO, but then I realised I didn't really have the time to do that. And I got in contact with the council of saying, do you have any emergency housing that I could support you with? And then from there, the discussion just expanded. And eventually I found they were happy to give me a loan to do the works, which was pretty amazing. The way it started was I did a refurb. I just did the quality that I always do. I then I took a small loan from the council. And this is what people didn't do or don't do. I invited the council to come and have a look at it. Now, normally people just take the loan, spend the money, the council doesn't hear about it. But I actually invited the council to come and have a look. And when they came and had a look, they were just blown away with the quality of what I did. I mean, I can't do a worse quality. I just do a good job. And they went, oh, this is amazing. Oh, do you know, we also have a scheme for, do you do commercial property? We also got a scheme for that. Oh, do you do new build? And they just started to open up. And that's the thing. Once you've got your foot in the door and you prove to them that you're for real and you're doing what they want, then they become much more amenable and tell you stuff that you normally wouldn't find out about. I've got a sourcing agent who's brilliant, sends me deals every day, doesn't charge me at all, and they are absolutely instant. And he's called Rightmove, right? So I have my Rightmove alerts, and most properties that I buy have been on Rightmove at some point. They may have gone on Rightmove and then come off Rightmove, and then they're off market. And then I've followed up when I've noticed that they haven't sold by sending a letter direct to vendor. So I bought a few that way. But pretty much everything that is on or off market at some point, someone has tried to sell it through traditional means. And I've got a very visual memory, and I can remember properties that have been on Rightmove and haven't sold. Or I've checked after 3-4 months, has this property sold? No, it hasn't. Right, let me write to the vendor. So that's the first thing. The other thing I do is I literally just walk around my area and take photos of properties that are derelict, go home, spend £3 on land registry, find out who owns them, and write to them. And surprisingly, it works very well. People write back and say, yeah, they want to sell their properties.
Well, there you have it for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening back to some of those guest interviews from deep in our archives. And if you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with a friend? Hit the share button on your podcasting app. Let them know what they're missing. Okay? We'll see you same time, same place next week. See ya.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget that we are constantly updating our resources inside the Wealth Builders membership site to help you create, build, and protect your wealth. Head over to wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership right now for free access. That's wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership.